is our bandsaw, one of our bandsaws, okay? First of all, the name of the saw, Bandsaw, it's not B-A-N, as a lot of people think. It's B-A-N-D, like rubber band. All right, and the way it gets that name is if we were to open this wheel guard here, all right, we basically have a top wheel and a lower wheel, okay? I'm going to hold that open. Be careful, it's a little sharp. Top wheel, lower wheel, and this continuous band of a blade, okay? So that's how it gets its name, bandsaw. The lower wheel is what's connected to the electric motor, so the lower wheel spins. As the lower wheel spins, because the blade connects the top wheel spins as well, okay? The blade moves down towards the table. Does anyone know why? Like, why wouldn't it go the other way, away from the table? Okay, yeah, it's going to want to lift the board off the table. So by going down towards the table, it helps keep the board flat on the machine top, okay? All right, so I wanted to open that so you guys can see what's going on inside. Do you think there's ever a reason you guys would need to open the wheel guards? No, they should stay closed and locked at all times. All right, so we're going to lock that back up. Thank you, sir. We're going to close the bottom door. Lock that back up. All right, some of the other parts to the bandsaw. We have this blade guide and guard. All right, it's a combination. Up here we have a blade guard, which protects your hands from the blade. But you got to be aware that behind the blade guard, it is open. All right, so if for some reason you were to reach your hand back here, which you shouldn't do, that blade's totally exposed, okay? We also call this a blade guide. I'm going to turn this little light on. You guys can see that there are wheel bearings, okay? So there's a little bearing on both sides of the blade, and there's a bearing behind the blade. And what they do is support the blade as it's cutting. So when we're pushing back on the blade, okay, it's going to rest on that back bearing, and it's going to roll and support the blade. As we try to turn our piece of wood, the blade wants to turn with it. So these wheels are going to hold it and keep it from spinning or turning. All right. There is no bearing on the front of the blade, though. So what do you think might happen if we pull back too fast? We could break the blade. What else could we do?
Cut your finger?
Yeah. What else? What's that? No. All right, well, if you pull backwards too quickly, and it's okay to back out of a cut, by the way, but if you have to back out, you always back out slowly. If you pull back too quickly, we could pull this blade right off the wheels because there's nothing holding the blade from, like these bearings support the blade in the back and the sides, okay? Now, to adjust the height of this guide and guard, we loosen this knob right on the side here. It looks just like this, but it's on the side. And we can raise or lower to the correct height. All right? What do you guys think is a good height to cut with? 1 or 2 inches above? Can your finger fit under 1 or 2 inches? Yeah, so my rule of thumb is 1/4 inch. All right? Do you have to get a ruler out and measure 1/4 inch? No. I like to use the tip of my pointer finger under this part right here, lower it down until it touches the board, and that's about the correct setting, okay? So again, as long as it's just a little bit above, you lock the adjustment wheel, then you're good to go, okay? So that's our blade guide. Now, if I set it all the way like this, will it still cut?
Yes.
Yes, it will. Okay, is it safe to cut that way?
No.
No, there's no need to have all this blade exposed. So if that's the case, why does the machine guard go that high anyway?
Big boards.
Okay, bigger boards. If you guys are doing guitar, specifically like a Les Paul, you'll see that later. We're going to do a process called resawing. All right, today we're just cutting the board flat. But sometimes with resawing, we'll take a fancy piece of wood that has a really nice grain pattern, and we'll stand it up on edge. And we'll cut it right down the middle, and then open the board up like a book. All right, and then when we glue those together, you're going to have a line right down the center, and the grain is going to be a mirror image on both sides. If you've ever looked at a guitar, you might have noticed that. All right, that's called book matching. So this machine can do book matching. All right, but you probably won't do that unless you're working on a guitar. Landon, please keep your glasses on. Thank you. Okay. So what we're gonna do is, by the way, what kind of cuts can we do on a bandsaw?
Curved cuts.
Okay, definitely curved cuts. Can we make a straight cut?
Yeah.
Yes, we can. Will it make a perfectly straight cut like a table saw or a radial arm saw would make?
No.
No. Okay, so if your goal is a perfect straight cut, this is not the machine for you. All right, curved cuts are what these machines are best at. Okay, so while we're actually using the machine today and cutting stuff, I figured we might as well make something useful. So we're going to cut out another one of these push sticks. Okay, the one you guys saw the other day was a little smaller. These longer ones are for the big table saw. All right, so what I'm going to do is line up my pattern. I'm just going to trace it on. Okay. Now, do you guys think that when I go to cut this piece, should I be on the line, inside the line, or outside the line? Outside the line. Very good. The reason is if I cut my line away, now I don't know what shape it's supposed to be. All right. When you're all done on the bandsaw, your line should still be there, so then you can take it to a sander and sand it perfectly to the shape you want it. All right. So that's really important. What do you think you should do if you feel like you're going to cut into your line?
Pull out.
Okay, pull it backwards. Maybe you are stuck though. You can't pull backwards. You feel like the only way you can go is forwards. Then what? Okay, turn the machine off. Come and get me. I will help you. All right, absolute worst case scenario. You have no other choice. You have to cut your line. Then you have to cut your line. And you may have to start over. All right, but try to avoid that. Okay? All right, now, as far as safety goes, we already talked about the height of the guard / guide. So we're going to reset this to the correct height and tighten that up. All right. The other thing you guys need to be aware of is the invisible cut line. All that is an imaginary line from the front of the blade to the edge of the table. Okay. Basically, if you keep your hand out of that invisible cut line, you will never get cut on a bandsaw. Okay. But the most common cut on the bandsaw is right here, right on your thumb. All right, because what people tend to do, they feel comfortable holding the board like this, and then they slip and they cut their thumb. Okay, so if your hands are outside of that invisible cut line, you'll never get cut. Okay, now as far as where to stand, this where I'm at right now is the worst place you could possibly stand while the machine's running. Does anyone know why?
The blade will shoot out that way. If
Why?
It breaks.
Okay, he got it exactly right. I've never seen this happen, okay? But blades do break, all right? We'll probably break at least one this school year. Most of the time, 99% of the time, the blade will stay inside the machine and the blade will just stop moving, all right? But there have been times, it's recorded, accidents where the blade has broken and hit the table, and then it flies out in this direction, okay? And now you've got essentially a metal whip with teeth on it flying through the air. So this is the worst spot you could stand, even if you're waiting to use the saw. All right, where you always stand should be right here, right in front of the machine. Okay. Now, the bandsaw is good at cutting curves, but sometimes we have a curve that's so sharp that the blade won't turn sharp enough. All right, this push stick will not be a problem. All right, but if I were to cut a curve out like that, okay, it's not going to make that turn. So what you're going to see me do, I'm going to demonstrate this. I'm going to make several straight cuts in, and I'm going to stop right before the line, and then I'm going to cut my curve. Those little straight cuts are called relief cuts. All right, and you're going to see how by doing that, it's going to make it a lot easier to turn because little pieces of wood are going to break away and give the blade room to move. All right, so I'm going to do my sharp turn first just to show you guys relief cutting, and then we're going to cut out the push stick. This 90-degree angle in here, do you think I'm going to be able to come in and turn 90 degrees?
No.
No, so I'm going to go straight in and stop, then I'm going to come out, come straight in and stop there as well. Okay? All right, questions before we get started? All right, here we go. I'm going to turn the dust collector on, please. We've got our blast gate right up here. Okay, turn off the dust collector, please. Okay, you guys see how we can still see our pencil line? All right, that's important. By the way, you just heard that like loud buzzing sound. This has an electrical brake on it. So through electricity and electromagnetism, it can slow the saw down instantly. All right, so it has that brake. Speaking of brake, if you're cutting along and all of a sudden, boom, blade breaks, it's going to make a loud bang. What should you do? Okay, turn the machine off, come and get me. Even if I'm across the room and there's a bunch of people working, I will probably still hear it, and I'll come over anyway. So if the blade breaks, you turn it off, you're waiting for me to come over, do you think it would be a good idea to open this up and see what's going on?
No.
No, because think about it. The motor's connected to which wheel? The bottom. You turn the saw off, which wheel is going to stop? The bottom. The only reason the top wheel stops is because the blade is connected to the top wheel. Well, now that the blade's broken, this upper wheel is going to do what?
Keep moving.
It's going to keep spinning for about 5 minutes. So I'll come over and I'll listen for that wheel to stop spinning. We'll unplug the saw and we'll put a new blade on. Okay? All right. So we talked about backing out of a cut nice and slow. All right. We talked about what to do if we get into a spot where we can't turn. Do you think it would be good to force the board around a tight turn? No. Okay. Another thing, as far as making curved cuts, all right? When we have to make a really sharp cut, what should we do before we make that curve? What will help us? What type of cut?
Relief cut.
Relief cuts, very good. Okay. All right, any questions on this bandsaw? All right, so let's take a little walk. We're going to go over to the little bandsaw. I want to show you guys a few things about that machine that's different, and then we're going to review for our test, and we'll do our test. All right, so let's go over to the other saw. Over at this smaller bandsaw, it's basically the same machine. It's just a little bit smaller. It has a few different features I'm going to go over, but the one other thing I wanted to talk about is your hand placement. All right, we know to keep our hands out of that invisible cut line. All right, but after we've been cutting a while, we get a lot of tiny blocks of wood, little scrap pieces laying next to the blade. Do you think it would be a good idea to reach your hand in and flick it away or wipe it away?
No.
No. All right, those little tiny pieces of scrap wood are not worth you injuring yourself potentially for the rest of your life, right? So what's the best way to get rid of that scrap wood?
Use the woodyard.
All right, I heard turn it off. You could.
Cutting and pushing out with a piece of wood.
Okay, if you have a scrap piece of wood or even your project, I probably wouldn't recommend it because you could mess your project up, but you could take a board that's long, okay, like this, and press it out of the way. What else? What if it's a bunch of small pieces? What else could you do?
Blow it away.
Yeah, just blow it away, okay? But never reach your hand in to get rid of that scrap wood, all right? Now, we talked about a few differences that this saw has. The other saw, when I loosened up the blade guard, it stayed in place. That's because it has a counterweight system on a pulley. This doesn't have that. So if the guard's way up and we loosen it, it's just going to crash down. Maybe on your hand, maybe it'll just crash down and break the guard. So you always have to hold the guard, and back here there's a yellow screw that we loosen up, and then we can adjust it that way. Okay? So that's one thing to be aware of. The other thing on this bandsaw, okay? This is a wood metal cutting bandsaw. So the cool thing about this machine is it's got a little transmission and a little shifter. And we can move that shifter into a lower gear and it'll slow this down a lot. And then you can put a metal cutting blade on it and we can cut metal with it. Those of you that end up taking level 2 will end up using this next door to cut metal. Right now it's set up for wood cutting and it's got a wood blade on it. So everything else is exactly the same. I just want you guys to be aware of the guard, okay? And the other thing I mentioned earlier is that the guard is open on this side. All right, a couple years ago, my brother had a kid over at Grice who did the right thing. They turned the machine off because they had to adjust the blade guard, but they didn't wait for the saw to stop. And they reached their hand just like this, right behind the blade guard. Luckily, the kid only got a tiny cut, which resulted in a Band-Aid, but Could that be much worse?
Yeah.
Yes. Do you think the bandsaw could amputate a finger? Absolutely. All right, just keep in mind, as long as you're out of that invisible cut line and you don't do something silly like reaching your hand behind the guard, you'll never get cut. Okay? Questions so far? All right, let's review, make sure we've covered everything, and then we'll get our test out. All right? Is there ever a time we want to open the wheel guards? No. Okay? Would it be a good idea to look away while you're making a cut? No. All right. Should the blade guard be within 4 inches of the piece being cut? No. 1/4 of an inch, right? Not 4 inches. Do we make any adjustments while the machine's running? No. All right. Is it ever okay to force a turn around a tight curve? No. All right. Good. We talked about never crossing the invisible cut line. When you're making relief cuts and you have to pull backwards, how should you do that?
Slow.
Yeah, nice and slow so you don't pull the blade off the wheels. Okay? What do you do when the blade breaks?
Turn the machine.
Turn it off, come and get me. Okay? Is it safe to stand to the right of the bandsaw where I'm standing right now? No. All right, obviously it's not running, so that's okay now, but while it's running, we don't do that. All right, and you've got small scrap wood next to the blade moving. What should you do?
Blow it away.
Blow it away, use a push stick, whatever, but not reach your fingers in. Okay? Questions? All right, guys, great. Let's go do our test.